Thank you for joining us for this evening's event. My name is Nick, and I'm one of the events hosts here at Powell's Books in Portland, Oregon. Before we begin, I want to encourage you to check out our lineup of upcoming virtual events by visiting our website at powells.com. If you don't already do so, please follow us on our social media handles on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok. Tonight, we are thrilled to welcome Annie Hartnett in conversation with Rufi Thorpe, talking about Annie's new book, Unlikely Animals. Annie Hartnett is the author of the novel Rabbit Cake and has received fellowships from the MacDowell Colonies, Sewanee Writers Conference, and the Associates of Boston Public Library. In her newest work, Unlikely Animals, natural-born healer Emma Starling once had big plans for her life, but now she's a medical school dropout. She's come back to the small town Everton, New Hampshire, to care for her father, who's dying from a mysterious brain disease. Clive Starling, her father, has been hallucinating small animals as well as having visions of the ghost of a long-dead naturalist, Ernest Harold Baynes, once known for letting wild animals live in his house. Emma arrives home knowing she must face her dad's illness, her mom's judgment, and her younger brother's recent stint in rehab, but she's unprepared to find that her former best friend from high school is missing, with no one bothering to look for her. The police say that they don't spend much time looking for drug addicts. Emma's dad is the only one convinced that the young woman might still be alive, and Emma is hopeful that he could be right. Set against the backdrop of a small town in the throes of a very real opioid crisis, Unlikely Animals is a tragicomic novel about familial expectations, imperfect friendships, and the possibility of resurrecting that which has been thought irrevocably lost. Hartnett will be joined in conversation by Rufi Thorpe, author of 3 novels, The Girls from Corona del Mar, Dear Fang with Love, and her most recent, The Knockout Queen, which was a finalist for the Penn Faulkner Award. This evening's event will include an audience Q&A, so please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen if you'd like to ask a question. As well, if someone has typed a question you'd also like to know the answer to, please upvote that particular question by clicking the thumbs up button. Lastly, support Annie and Powell's by purchasing a copy of her book from us. A link to buy Unlikely Animals will be shared in the chat a couple of times tonight, along with links to Rufi's books as well. Annie and Rufi, we are so thrilled to have you here tonight, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want Annie to get to read a little bit, but I also wanted to say, if people want to put in the chat, a thing I like to do is for you guys to recommend me a book that I can buy from Powell's, because obviously I already have this one. So if in the chat you guys can put some book recommendations, so I can buy maybe me a book and Annie a book at the end, that would be great.
Oh, that's nice. I like that idea. I will buy something too. So
Great.
Crazy, guys. So this book, which you should also buy on top of whatever else you're buying tonight, or don't, but I hope you do. I'm going to read to you. Thanks so much for being here. I wish we were all together in person, but this is still really fun for me, and I'm really excited to talk to Rufi tonight. Rufi and I are recently become friends, and before that I was her biggest fan, and I still am her biggest fan, but now it's cool because we're also friends. So I am going to read the beginning of this book because that's makes sense to me tonight. I have not read the first part yet, so if I stumble on words, come see me in a year and I'll have it down. All right, so years later, when people in Everton would tell this story, they would say it was Clive Starling who called the reporter, the way that man loved attention. But we remember it the way it happened. It was the midwife who slid down the hall to the payphone to get the Upper Valley, New Hampshire news on the horn. It was a slow news day, so the reporter had zipped right over to the hospital, and he let the midwife go on and on into the tape recorder about a condition called charismata iamaton, which translates from Greek to gifts of healing. She insisted that the hands of this newborn baby, tiny hands still coated in that awful gunk of birth, had cured her sciatica. She said most people with natural healing talents are unaware of their gifts, but this baby had the strongest natural talent she'd ever seen. Baby with miracle healing potential born, the next morning's headline read. Town of Everton, New Hampshire rejoices. As we recall it, Clive Starling wasn't rejoicing. He was pretty ticked off, actually. The reporter didn't bother to interview him. Not one single question, not even his goddamn name was printed, mentioned only as a poetry professor and the baby's father. Might as well be chopped liver, he said, tossing the newspaper to the side. The reporter clearly didn't know how to do his job. Clive would have been much more forthcoming than his wife. He would have said he'd known this baby was bound to be special. Clive's wife was quoted in the article. Her full name was there in black and white. But all Ingrid Starling had to say was that the whole thing was nonsense, to please leave her family alone. Truthfully, Ingrid did wonder if there was something different about her baby, but how would she know? She'd never had a baby before. This was her first one. She didn't have anything to say about it yet, especially not to a reporter from the Upper Valley, New Hampshire News. Clive and Ingrid took their miraculous baby home, where they learned through a series of experiments that their child's hands weren't magic, not exactly, but they sped up the natural healing process. A bad 10-day cold could be knocked down to a 3-dayer, a poison ivy rash could heal in a day, a dog bite could scab up overnight. Clive Starling dubbed it the charm, but just because it had a name didn't mean his wife was going to let their daughter use it, not until she was at least 18. The people of Everton respected that, for the most part, even if it seemed like more than a little selfish, with so many in town suffering from an illness or pain. Still, Evertonians believed a woman should be able to do what she wants with her own kid. The midwife's testimony in the newspaper helped too. According to most accounts, she'd explained, charismata iamaton grows much more powerful after the healer grows into adulthood. It's completely unreliable when the healer is still a child. So our town could wait. No one wanted unreliable healing. As she grew, little red-headed Emma Starling was often asked for high fives around town just in case any of her lucky, health-giving juice rubbed off. But for the most part, everyone treated Emma like a normal kid, albeit one headed for great things. Emma was not only a natural-born healer, but smart, too. When she got to high school, she was top of her class at Upper Valley Regional. Emma did go through a rebellious period, started around 16, when she and her best friend, Crystal Nash, would sit in the McDonald's by the longest covered bridge in America and charge for time spent with a real-deal teenage healer, advertised on Craigslist. But nothing truly astonishing ever occurred during those years of adolescent healing, and eventually Emma had to leave our town for college. 54% of our students go on to a 2 or 4 year college, but Emma went further away than most, to Pomona College in California, out of our jurisdiction. Of course, we kept tabs on her through her mother. We listened to Ingrid Starling bragging in the supermarket over the next 4 years, Emma this and Emma that, glossing over what was happening with her son, Emma's younger brother, heading to rehab again. We heard when Emma graduated with honors, and we heard when Emma was starting medical school at the prestigious UCLA David Geffen Med. We overheard when Ingrid told her friends at the book club that Emma had agreed to come home for Thanksgiving break. She'd been away for 2 years, but she was flying back for Turkey Day to see her dying father, who was suffering from some kind of mysterious brain disease. The man had always been a little whacked in the head, but had gotten much worse. I think it'll do wonders for you if you come home for the week, Ingrid said on the phone. And then she'd asked if Emma thought she might be able to do something to help delay her father's degeneration, slow it down a tad, so that they could all have a little more time with him. Ingrid said she'd read on the internet about new research claiming electric shocks could be helpful in preventing the advancement of brain diseases. Music and aromatherapy could also help, so yes, they would try all that. But who knows what a dose of the charm could do? We tittered with excitement at Maple Street. We wanted to see Emma work her magic. We had waited so long. I don't know, Mom, Emma said. We could hear Emma breathing through the phone line, and we wished we could hear what she was thinking, but she was all the way out in California, out of our reach. It'll at least give him something else to focus on, her mother said. Since his retirement, well, he's gone a little adrift. Professor Clive Starling had been forced to retire mid-semester, the end of October, since he had started seeing small animals in the classroom, asking students, "Who let the cats in here?" It was both a source of entertainment at Maple Street Cemetery, both funny and sad, the kind of story we like best. Thank you for listening to that. So that's the prologue.
Thank you. I love getting to hear a taste of it, and especially because I want to ask about the narration and stuff. So I'm glad that people got to hear it. So what was the initial seed idea for this book, and then all the ways that it mutated?
Yeah, so this will be my longest answer of the night. So My dad called me today and said, you should shorten your answers. Okay. So that's where I'm at. So I started writing this book when I was writing a version of this book when I was in the MFA program at the University of Alabama. I was writing this coming home story about this woman who came home to take care of her father, and she was going to teach fifth graders. And that is part of what happens in the book. But I didn't work on it for years because I wrote it a little bit in graduate school, and then I started it again. I worked in Rabbit Cake for years, and then so I picked it up in 2017 right after Rabbit Cake was published, and started working on it. But I said to my friend, our friend Tessa Fontaine, we were sort of talking about second books and how they were not the same experience as the first book. And Tessa said, is the first cut the deepest? Will it never feel that good again? Is this something we just have to do now because that's what we started doing? And I was just really miserable trying to write something new. So I'm working on it, but I'm not happy. And then I'm up in visiting friends in Newport, New Hampshire, which is a sort of small town outside of Sunapee that's in that region. And I'm driving along this road that is tree lined, and there's not really houses in that part of the town. And there's a covered bridge, a little pond. And all of a sudden I look up and there's this enormous yellow mansion, and it looks like the nicest hotel spa you've ever been to. It's just this beautiful building. I'm like, what's that? I want to go there. But at the base of the driveway, there's all these no trespassing signs. I'm like, that is private property. And our friends who had just moved to the town did not know what it was. So we went home, and I Googled, enormous yellow mansion Newport, and found that it had belonged to this Gilded Age robber baron who had been born in that town but had left to make his millions, and then he came back to retire. And this story, I don't know whether it's true or not, and because I've heard different accounts, but I like this version of the story, that he knocked down the house he was born in except the room that he was birthed in, and built the mansion around that. So that is a weird start. But then with all his millions, he bought up 60 farms like in the area and fenced it all in, and started shipping in animals from all over the world. And it was this huge hunting park that I'm trying to remember that. Okay, well, it doesn't matter. There's famous people that have gone, and then my gone to visit the park, and my mind totally blanked. But it was this huge park. But I already knew I was writing another book that was set in sort of, my first book was also set in sort of like 2000 sometime, and this book, it was set in 2014. Because of the type of writer I am, because I'm interested in the internet and I like to tell dark jokes, I didn't want to write historical fiction. It was not something that I thought I would be good at, but I was just so interested in this that I wanted to learn more. And is because then I found out that the park was still intact today, and so it was sold out of the Corbin family is the family. They went bankrupt, and they sold this property after World War II. And since then, it's been owned by this group of 25 anonymous millionaires who each own a share. And it's all still there, totally intact and totally closed off from the rest of the world. So most people who are in this town who I met had not been inside. You have to know somebody who would take you inside, one of the owners or one of the people who own a share. And most of them do not live in the town. So it's like untouched nature for 130 years. And it's also like just rich people land. And so it was super interesting to me. And so I started wanting to know more. And so I went to the Historical Society in Newport, sat in the attic, and started going through sort of what they had. And that's when I found out about Ernest Harold Baynes, who was a naturalist for the park from 1904 till his death in 1925. And he was a real life Dr. Dolittle, that he had animals that lived in his house. Fox, a bear named Jimmy, two coyotes, two wolves, tons of birds. He had two tame bison, which were from the herd in the park. There was the largest private herd in America was in Corbin Park, and they then the naturalist had a big role in bringing bison back from like the brink of extinction. So I just kept finding all this cool stuff, and once I found about him, I just was like, this guy, why isn't he the most famous man in America? And just it was just played into my exact interest. And then so I was already writing a book set in 2014 about a man who was dying, and so it seemed kind of natural that that Ernest Harold Baynes would show up as a ghost and would be his companion. So Clive, the father in the book, has this brain disease, and he sort of conjures this ghost, and they develop a friendship, and things happen because of their friendship. And then the last thing is that I found out that, and Clive does not have Lewy body disease exactly, but that is one of the diseases that he has like some disease I made up. I don't want to like commit to anything because that's not how I work as a writer either. But he has a disease that makes him hallucinate small animals, which happens to people who have Lewy body disease sometimes. So the animals in the house that are there and they're not real, and then Ernest Harold Baynes, who had real wild animals in his house, it was just like, so I will show you just a couple pictures of this before we talk about a lot of other things. And I'm going to try to do this without showing you my desktop, because my desktop is the messiest place in the universe. But it's all hidden, so sort of. Okay, so this is the mansion from my view. I took that picture, and so you can't see the no trespassing sign. And then that's an aerial view from the internet. And there's Ernest Harold Baynes and his pet fox, who plays a big role in the book. Yeah, and so as I'm learning about him, I find out that I'm in the library, in the Newport Library, and I'm asking the librarian what she knows about Ernest Harold Baynes, if she knows anything about him. And she's also a historian, so she knew some stuff. But there's another man who was sitting at a table across the room, and he just says, "Oh, he was quite the womanizer." So Ernest Harold Baynes lived in this cottage at the edge of the forest, at the edge of the park, with tons of wild animals in the house, and then he was always leaving to go on the road. And also he was down at or up, I guess, at the Cornish Art Colony, like bedding all the women artists there. So I just love that they didn't have kids, but that she's home taking care of wild animals and he's out having a time. This is his bear, Jimmy the bear, who has a big role in the book. So what I was able to do, because you're like, this is a book set in 2014, Annie, I was able to take his real writings, and these pictures are in the book, or some of them are, and they're in the public domain. So they add like a texture of learning who this ghost is and sort of what he wants. And so that's throughout the book, is just sort of like fun documents that I was able to add. But the main story is 2014. This is one of his wolves, Dauntless. He had Death and Dauntless. Sharing a sandwich with chickadees. Songbirds were his first love. And there's the Sprite, his favorite fox. That was the creature he loved most in all the world. And then there's the two tame bison. And there's his wife. We had the deer.
So I have to ask, did you read the Dr. Dolittle books when you were little?
I didn't, but I read the who's the vet? James Herriot was the but no, I didn't read Dr. Dolittle. I don't, as far as I remember. I did see the Eddie Murphy movie.
It's almost as good. They're very charming. but I think that part of what is magical about Dr. Dolittle and also about these stories and about your book is that it's all these kinds of like magic that you want to be true. Like
Mm.
there's and even just the fact that she's a healer, that is like the ultimate fantasy, right? That we can like stave off death and that like some people are magic.
Mm.
How do you like, how did you first embrace like writing slight magical realism, and like how do you think about it artistically?
Yeah, I mean, that is a really nice way of putting, I think, what does direct all my writing, even though it doesn't necessarily, I haven't even quite thought about it the way that you just said, but so much of it is like, is my hope for the way that I wish things were. But also my struggle with things not being that way. That I wanted the Emma to be born with enough healing touch, but also struggle with it, her knowing, even as she's coming home, she knows whether or not she ever had magic, she doesn't have enough to save her father. And so I wanted that to be the struggle of like the world might be magic, and there might be some hope, but there's only so much we can do. Um, so that, but that you can find hope and get second chances in other ways. So much of this book is about, I wanted there to be second chances for almost everyone in the novel, in their different ways, that they're all very broken at the beginning and then everyone gets a second chance in some way. And that was one of the things that I knew I was writing about in the beginning, was that I wanted people, to have a last shot at whatever they sort of wanted most.
Well, and I feel like that there is dark, it is a dark comedy, there's a darkness in this book, but there's also like comedy and humor and levity and whimsy. And how did like, were you always funny in your writing, or did you have to figure it out?
I was always funny in my writing. Yeah, that's the thing that I think I realized I liked about writing, is that I did not want to be a writer growing up. I wanted to be an artist. I wanted to be a cartoonist. And then I was told by my, high school art teacher that she had me, I took her in art like like 4 years of high school. And then, but then the last year she taught an art history class. So I took that too. And so she pulled me aside at that point and said, I have to tell you, I know you're super into art, but you're a much better writer than you are an artist. And so that kind of like, I was like, oh, whoa, well, let's change gears. I'm not going to major in art like I thought I would in college. I wasn't applying to art school, so it wasn't like totally crushing,
Maybe I
but
was wrong.
yeah.
Maybe
Well, I don't know. It
studied.
actually was very helpful. I mean, I don't think you should do that to high school students, but for me, it was, um, I also love when people say like weird, inappropriate things to me. So because I like file it away. So it didn't hurt my feelings so much as I was like, all right, put that one in the file. It'll come up in 15 years. And so I didn't realize that I wanted to be a writer until I was in my final semester at college, and I had a professor who was visiting from Syracuse to Hamilton College, a small college, and he gave us George Saunders. I guess that was the main person that I really remember. And I was like, oh, if you could write stories like this, like, then why would I
That
want to do
makes
anything
a lot of
else?
sense.
So that was the first time that I was really interested in writing. And the first story I wrote, which is, you can see it how you get from Sea Oak to this story, but it was a story about Bobby Fischer, the chess player, haunting the back of a Honda Civic. So it was like that sort of was my start of, and also I am from a family where everyone is kind of funny in their own ways, and I always felt that I was funny and felt no one noticed that I was funny. My brother especially my younger brother I have two brothers, but he's very in your face funny. And So I always felt like nobody notices that I'm funny. And I found, once I found writing, I was like, oh, well, this is where I can be funny and that people will notice it rather than me just sort of sitting in the corner saying something and being like, anybody hear that? That was amazing.
Oh, I love this. I love this origin story. Um, okay. Let's talk a little bit though about the narration of the book because it's sort of clear from the passage that you read that it's narrated by the dead of the cemetery, or is it not fully mentioned? Now I'm not remembering.
It's kind of like at that point,
Hidden.
it's at the end that you I wanted to leave it like as a reveal at the sort of end of the chapter. It says Maple Street Cemetery, but I think as a reader, you probably don't fully catch up until the next paragraph. That's like that the first paragraph of chapter 1 after the prologue that says Emma didn't come into Everton the way that took her by Maple Street Cemetery, so she didn't hold her breath when she drove by us. And then the dead people, a couple, well, maybe lines later, start the individuals start talking. So then you really get that's the way that you're hearing this story is through the residents of the cemetery in this town.
So how did you come to that narrative choice? Like, certainly it wasn't your first go at the story or like, and now, like, how did you come to write it from the point of view of those in a cemetery?
So, and I know we will talk about him because I'm sure people are here because of the graphic that you made with John Irving. And so what really happened was that I wanted to write a story that had much more of a plot. So this is No Shade to Rabbit Cake. Rabbit Cake is well, let's just say it's a perfect book. And it's but it's so I always say about that book that it's it doesn't matter what happens in that book because all that matters is the narrator. That you love the narrator and so you go where she takes you. But so I wanted to write a book that had this bigger plot, sort of like a John Irving novel that has like a lot of different pieces and that they all come together in some fabulous way at the end. So that was my goal. And so for my first couple drafts, I wrote it with a omniscient third person narrator who had the sort of abilities, and that he does sometimes in his novels, that he has an omniscient narrator. So that was the first way that I wrote it. And then I showed it to a couple friends, but one friend was super helpful that my friend Lucas Mann, whose book you can put in the chat because he's written 3 memoirs. He said that this omniscient narrator is so funny. Omniscient narrators, like, they can't be funny. And because who is it? Who's talking? Like, and I was like, Lucas, I don't care. That's not, I was not interested in that question. But then when I got to McDowell, where I was there for a month, I came with a completed draft and I was like, okay, it's probably time to address Lucas's question of who's talking. That the omniscient narrator with so much personality, like, probably can't work. So when you get to McDowell, they hammer home, like, don't waste your time here because geniuses have been here before you. Their names are on the wall and you're just kind of like, why am I here? How on earth did I get picked? And then and they talk about James Baldwin when you get there, and then they talk about Thornton Wilder. And so Thornton Wilder wrote Our Town when he was there, and the cemetery that's Our Town is based on in the town that's Petersburg, New Hampshire. So it's my second day there, and so I said to a very new friend, because I've been there for 48 hours, but at dinner, like, do you think I could do this with my novel that you haven't read? And he was like, sure, it's a long tradition. I was scared of doing it because Lincoln and the Bardo had come out like the year before, 2 years before. So having sort of started because of George Saunders, I didn't want to try to be George Saunders. for the rest of my life or ever exactly. But so I was scared to do it, but he said, you know, there's a long tradition and try it and see if it works. And so I tried it, and then I showed it to him. And he said, this is all, this is you. This is not George Saunders. This isn't anybody else. So that was very useful. And sometimes I just need that permission to do the thing I probably am going to do anyway. That's some personality thing, I think, beyond writing, is I'm always seeking permission, but I'm always going to do the thing that I want to do. And so that was, and then I didn't question it, because it also, you know, I just took you through how the book came to be. And it always feels like, okay, how do I even explain this book? Because there's so much going on. And so the first drafts, there was so much going on because I was interested in such different places, like the 2014 stuff in the town, and then what was happening in 1904 to 1925 when Ernest Harold Baynes was living in the town. So how do I marry these things together? Who would care about that? Of course, the dead people in the town, who would care about the dead people in the town, and they would also care, at least these people who are living in the cemetery, very much care about the living, because they sit on the graves and watch us like they're watching television, and they have like, they love,
Or reading a novel.
or yeah, or yeah. That, but it's so visual for them. But yeah, I guess they're omniscient, so you don't get omniscience in television, which turns out to be the most fun you can have. I love omniscient narrators, and I would love to do one again, because you can, at least with these narrators, because they can read everybody's thoughts in the town, including the dog's point of view. So you get the dog's
I know. When you first get the dog's thoughts, I was like, oh, she's gonna have fun with this. It was like the moment where I was like, I'm all in. Let's go.
Yeah, that was for me. But you know what I did? I put the dog's thoughts in there like nearly immediately. I think as soon as the dog appeared, I was like, and here's his thoughts. Even before the ghost showed up. So it was just, that is such a natural step for me. But it wasn't until after the book had sold, so after I've edited like it a ton, did I add the fox's point of view. So the fox took me a long time, and then it just hit me one day that I said, wait, if I have the dog's point of view, like, why can't I have the fox's point of view? And so the fox, without giving too much away, he comes from Russia, and my brother, and this is stuff that got cut out of the book, so it's not really a spoiler, but my brother is thankfully no longer living in Russia, but my older brother had been living in Russia for a couple of years. So I would always WhatsApp him and say, like, how would you tell this person off in Russian, and like use as many swears as you want. Or sometimes I would ask like for a specific set of swears, and he would be like, it's always much worse. Like when you say something, like you take it up a notch. And so he would come up with these like this list of swears. And so I took it all out, but originally the fox had this like crazy all in Russian, like strings of swears that he would say at the mother. But
I wish that they were still in.
You can picture it as you read it and think about the fox. Just also picture him swearing in Russian.
So animals.
Mm-hmm.
You write a lot about animals, and you love animals. Do you have like? I mean, I feel like all writers realize pretty quick that you can't really control your obsessions. And also that you're kind of bound in a certain sense to write the same book over and over again, because they're your obsessions, they're your core obsessions. And so they're going to recur over and over again. Even if you try and write a completely different book, it's going to wind up unearthing some of the same obsessions. What is it? Have you discovered or investigated about animals that is like so captivating for you?
I think I have always been obsessed with animals, and so that is something like from my childhood that I so I was just always I became a vegetarian when I was 7, and I've always been the person that would just rather meet your dog than meet your baby. And I just feel connected to animals. And I was an environmental studies minor up into, actually, I was a major, and then I changed that, and then I changed because I couldn't, I was like having anxiety attacks about global warming, and this was in 2006. And so um, I'm sure it's even worse now to be a environmental studies major, but I changed it to philosophy, and then was an environmental studies minor, and then I changed that to be creative writing minor after that class. So I had 2 weeks left, and I switched it. So I've always like just been interested in the natural world, and I worked at 2 different zoos. So because I got internships there. I didn't even get paid. So it was an obsession, it's always been an obsession. So I felt self-conscious about it going from first book to second book. And I think writers do have to learn, you're just going to be obsessed about some things that you kind of have to embrace. And so I felt like, okay, I just wrote Rabbit Cake with so many animals. I'm starting to write this book that was about teachers, so I didn't think, and animals just kept like pop 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 hello. And so I asked my agent about it, and she was like, I think people would be disappointed if they didn't have an Annie Hartnett novel with a bunch of animals in it. So at that point I embraced it, and so I'm allowing it to be, but you don't want to turn it into a stick. It doesn't.
Oh, of course. It has to be, you have to still be obsessed. You still have to be doing something with it. It's not like they're there because it's,
Yeah, and if Ernest Harold Baynes hadn't fallen into my lap, then I probably would have tried to limit myself to the dog or something. But once I had Ernest Harold Baynes, he was
let it rip.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, talking about understanding that having a career as a writer is going to mean returning to different obsessions over and over again, just of course naturally makes me think about our mutual boyfriend, John Irving.
Can't control what haunts us, he says.
Who of course like has direct images and situations that arise over and over again in different books. But I feel like this book is in many ways kind of a love letter to him. And he was also a big influence on me and my writing, and sort of was the missing piece when I was trying to feel my way between the very like violent and serious things I wanted to talk about, and then like the compulsive kind of need to be funny, and how they could be married in a harmonious way. He was sort of like very important in terms of how I figured out how to do that. But how did John Irving enter your life? And like what are your favorite John Irving novels?
I mean, that is what he offers. That he offers the show as much violence as you want, but also show like have tons of comedic situations, and that's what he is like the master of. So I felt and I've said to you before, I want to go back and reread your first 2 novels, because I didn't read any John Irving until, so I kind of wonder, like, was I so in love with your work? Was it like
because you could smell the John Irving on it?
I could sniff the John Irving, yeah. I mean, I'm just kind of interested now, or I just want to see the influence, and I would like to read them again. But so Rabbit Cake came out, and I had a couple people tell me, your writing, and most of them actually were my father's friends, that said, your writing reminds me of John Irving. And I knew that was a compliment, but I had not read any John Irving, and I was embarrassed about that. So I was like, oh, thank you so much. And then, went home and was like, well, I should go read some John Irving, I guess. And so I read Gart first, and then I read Owen Meany right after that. And then I read like, I think 6 others, but my reaction to that was, oh my gosh, like I can see what they mean because of that darkness and lightness, which is definitely in Rabbit Cake, but I loved the grander plot that he had
So,
has going on
yeah.
and everything. It's just like so I wanted that. I was just like, well, I would love to write a novel that is something like that. So that was really my goal for this book. So when you notice that, after reading this, it was like I was so happy and so blown away because it wasn't, it wasn't in the copy at that point. You just knew it, and so that was the best. And so it really is a book that and there are many nods to him throughout. That there's the big play, that is a real Owen Meany sort of.
Oh yes.
um
I was just I was in heaven. I mean, and I don't want to do spoilers or
yeah, that's a
anything.
spoiler, but
Um wait, okay. I'm doing this all out of order, but I'm like I saw the clock and I'm like, "Oh, we have to switch to question and answer soon." Um I guess I want to backtrack a little bit to animals because isn't there a story about a deer in your college dorm?
oh yeah, so there is, so throughout the book, there's always, the way I write, and this is the way that I took the town, is like I take something from real life and then I like put it through the imagination machine and like completely mangle it, um and try to make it, and I'll like put two. I really like, and this is, I think, mostly from reading John Irving. I've really become interested in coincidence and comedic, like how you can use coincidence to make just like amazing situations. And so I take little seeds of real life, and I think the deer one was a so there is a deer that gets into the house at one point, and at first you kind of think it's a hallucination, and then you realize as soon as the deer is in the house, it's a real deer. And there were two deer that got into the college dorm and just like kicked everything, like kicked all the furniture and broke all the windows. And it was horrible for the deer, but it was just like also a chaotic situation that can cause. So I love when that sort of stuff happens in real life. That, I mean, I feel bad for the deer in that situation, but they were fine. And so I think they were fine. At least they're fine. The one that gets into the house in this book is fine. He gets like some minors, or she, I guess it's a doe, I think. But yeah, Bambi is what Clive names her. So I like to take things. I'm always on the hunt for like good news stories, that involve animals, or that involve the things that are interesting to me. And so that one just happened like in my dorm. So that just showed up one day.
Wow, that is I remember I went to high school in New Hampshire and in my dorm room a bat got in and
Oh.
then we were trying to figure out how to get it to go back out again, and it obviously was so freaked out, and finally we like took all of our blankets and like just walked towards it so that the room kind of got smaller and it would finally go back out the window. Okay, I guess what do I want to pick? Well, I'm super interested in the coincidences thing. And I guess that I'm never sure how much people like going to events really want to hear about craft stuff, but this is really just for me. It's very selfish. But I feel like every book that I write sort of winds up teaching me something that I didn't understand about novels before. And you took this like big plot structure, like you figured out how to work it. And so like what are the things that this novel taught you, do you think, that you're like, now I know how to do this little trick thing? Like maybe it's the way you think about coincidence or
Yeah. I mean, this novel, so much of, so when I wrote Rabbit Cake, and I wrote it in an MFA program for the most part, and then I wrote it by myself for a while, and then I sent it to agents, like without showing it to anybody. And I got an agent, and she's a great agent, but she, once she took me on, she said, all right, well, what's the climax of this book? Like, I love the voice and that's why I signed you, but what's the climax? It's like, people don't talk about fiction like that. Like, that was not the MFA conversation I'd ever had. And so she was like, well, yes, they do. And this book needs a climax. And then I kind of had to hit the books of figuring out the 3-act structure. And no one had sort of taught me that. And I hadn't thought about books that way. And so I had to look at books and figure out, and then I was like, oh, just the climax is just what the novel is really about. It's like everything coming to a head, and that's the problem you're trying to solve. And so I changed Rabbit Cake so that it has a climax between the two sisters, because the book is about the sisters, really. And then this book, it was so structured, because at that point I was obsessed with structure. So I really made sure to try to structure this as much as possible. It is a little bit hard to structure this book in the beginning, in the traditional, like, there's an inciting incident and that causes everything, because there's so much setup that needs to happen in order for it to work like that John Irving novel, where there's a lot of different things you need to know. They're all going to come together in the end. So I'm definitely asking the reader to go on a bit of a journey with me, and to be a little patient, I think, in the beginning, to sort of trust the narrators, that they say at one point, like, sometimes, a good story meanders a little, and they tell you a story about this minor character who feeds the bears, and you're like, what does she have to do with the story? She has nothing to do with the family, who's the main focus. So I'm winking at you a little bit. That's like, that's, I guess, one thing I've learned, that sometimes if you're self-conscious about something in your book, it's okay to just address it and be like, I know, well, with these narrators especially, but I think that no matter what, you can kind of find a way to just be like, I know what you're thinking, and I'm going to address it somehow.
Trust me, this is on purpose. I'm aware of it.
Yeah, I'm in control here. And so these narrators really allowed me that, because there's so much telling the story, and they're in control because they know what happens. They're not all knowing exactly, but they are all knowing in certain ways. But I really was obsessed with structure, and find that that's really helpful with writing a novelist, to not sort of ignore that. And also, I one thing about structure is to have something big that happens in the middle, so that basically it doesn't just like die like a pancake. And my agent and my editor both had a suggestion together that they kind of came up with, that I needed a bigger scene in the middle somewhere. And so that was not something that I guess I learned myself, but so I have this big scene in the middle that is, I have 2 favorite scenes in the book, but that's one of them that happens at the banquet.
That was going to be like my second kind of question, was what was the funnest, like my closing question. So for people who have, I don't know if people have been putting questions in the chat, but if you have, put them in the question and answer balloon, because then that's where I'll be able to read them from. But so what was the funnest scene to write, and like your secret favorite baby? And what was like the hardest bear of a scene to write?
So the final scene is my favorite. And that I wrote that early on, and that is my favorite. And that is, I mean, that is my real John Irving scene. And that is sort of where there's a lot, and I can't talk about it too much without giving it away, but so much of the book is about everyone getting a little more time, and especially that and the book is about, the reason that the book is so funny and helpful and happy, even though it's really a book about death, is because the people in the graveyard sort of have an understanding of the stakes of what happens after death. And they also just really love the people in the town and want everyone to have a little more time, and they want to protect the children most of all, because they're the people that have the most time, that if all is fair, they have the most time left. So there's a real like love for the children, who are the ones that Emma teaches. So that was my favorite scene. And then scenes that are difficult for me is anytime I have to make people have a heartfelt conversation. I have to kind of just sit there and try to like act it out. Say, what would you say to your dad in this situation? And that's not fun for me. I like to just go off the rails and do the fun thing.
You don't like the confrontation?
Well, there's this, no, not the confrontation. The like, sort of, I mean, if your father's dying, like, what do you want to say to him? And you have to have, there's this one scene that actually I watched. Sometimes people say my work is like Wes Anderson, and I rewatched The Royal Tenenbaums, which was really helpful because there's this one, and I also listened to this podcast that my husband listens to. That's the Rewatchables is, which I don't listen to, but he had me listen to that. And that movie is like so many different things are happening, but the key scene is that the Ben Stiller character says to Gene Wilder, he says, "It's been a hard year, Dad." And that's like the whole thing. And that's why the movie has so much heart, because you understand that like that's a big confession. And then his father just says, "I know." And for that character to just say, "I know," is huge. So to get your father to listen to you. So the scene that happens between Emma and her father was very much helped by that movie and that podcast.
So wonderful. It's so fun just getting to hear where everything came from. Okay, let me see the Q&A. Okay. So Ellen, what was your favorite animal to write? Was there a personality or sense of humor you assigned to an animal that was particularly fun to work with?
So the two animals that have personalities, I mean, you get a little bit into the deer's head when she shows up in the house, but it's the fox and the dog are our main characters, and they are so much fun. I think the fox, no, I don't know. Moses is my favorite, but I also love, they both have such distinct personalities at this point that I can't remember what it was like to work with them in the beginning, but now I'm just like, it feels like picking between favorite children, so I won't.
And then Rachel asked, can you tell us how this book ended up leading you right back to cartooning? Ha, suck it, high school art teacher. I was going to ask about the cartooning because you've done this absolutely amazing thing of drawing cartoons for people that pre-order the book. And how many have you done now?
So I was I'm now adding that one for thank yous. So I am now up to, and I still have about 20 to do, but 447 is my tally today. So I have done 430 something, completed and mailed. So this was such a fun and amazing project. And I wrote about actually how much it's meant to me today. There's an essay in Lit Hub. But so it happened. So I was at McDowell where I'm writing this book, and working on like much of like the book that would come to exist happened at McDowell. But every night I would hang out because I could work all day. I was 5 months pregnant, but I did not have a child, and it was the best. And then at night I would hang out, and we would just all socialize. And so it's artists of all different disciplines. And at the time, Amy Kurzweil was there with me for, I think, the first 2 or maybe even 3 weeks. And she said, so like I said, I wanted to be an artist. And one night I like sort of cozied up to her and said, you know, you are the coolest person here. You have my dream job, and you are just so amazing. And if it would ever not be too much of a bother if I could just see how you worked. And she's very nice, and we had a mutual friend, so it wasn't like that weird of me. And she after dinner one night, she brought her supplies and gave us all a demonstration. And the thing that blew my mind was the way, so I just didn't know like how New Yorker cartoons came to have that look, and it's like an ink wash technique. So she showed me the ink wash that really, she did the pencil and then she showed me the ink, and we wrote down all the pens she used. A bunch of us did it, and then she did the ink wash, and that really like brings it fully to life. She did a demonstration with me last night at Community Bookstore, which would be on YouTube if you want to look it up. It's amazing, just watching her. And she does a monthly class for $10 through Patreon, so you can be in a cartooning class with the most encouraging teacher that you've ever had in your life. I'm part of the class. So that, and so she did one class, and then we did it every night, even after Amy left. There was a group of us that just drew every night, and it was just so much fun. So it was part of like my whole process at that point.
Yeah, it's so much fun with the book.
And it was so helpful. And also just actually to sit down and do a drawing and be done 20 minutes later, like when you're writing a novel, that
the opposite of, yeah.
So much fun. So then at the end, Sarah, my editor, said, you know, this book should have a map. Can you draw? And like, could you draw the map? And I was like, I definitely did not think I could, but I was like, yes, give me that assignment. I want to do that. So the map in the book, which I think a lot of you have the book, but some of you probably don't yet. So that's the map in the book that I did using Amy's like ink wash technique. And so that was like, my art felt very close to the process of this book. And like, and then I stopped for a while because I didn't have childcare during the pandemic, and I didn't have time, but it was always something I was like wanting to get back to. And then what happened was at Hanukkah, someone tweeted that their husband had given them a pre-order of the book for one night and had drawn a crayon like cover. And I was like, oh, isn't that so cute and nice? And you know, it's December, the book comes out in April, like to have something physical, and I could do that for people, like so I just tweeted like, you know, if you pre-order the book, I will make you a drawing. And it was just, and it was at first any animal, except I said no pet portraits because I knew that would take me a lot longer, and I was also really self-conscious that I wouldn't do a good job making pet portraits. But everybody wanted pet portraits, so I was like, well, you know, if they're not that good, they're basically free. I mean, they're not free because you bought the book, but you get the book, so it's free in some way. Or I tried to think of them as free drawings for my own sort of sanity, that I wasn't like, this is a $30 drawing, Annie. And it just kind of kept going from there. And I kept thinking about like, when should I stop? And I was like, never. This is so fun. And also, I have been so isolated. I live in right now the middle of nowhere, Massachusetts, and we have our friends in Providence, but I don't get to see them as often as I'd like. And then I'm like, you know, pandemic motherhood. And one thing even if that's not your living situation, one thing that's really like doesn't happen is the small talk between strangers. That's like, I care about this, like, you know, standing, I don't know, in the coffee line and someone tells you whatever, like some random story about their day, or things that don't happen. You have meaningful conversations with people, but it's not small talk. And suddenly my chat is full of like stories of dogs, like a lot of dead dogs, but a lot like, this is Kevin. He likes to cuddle in a blanket. And pictures, and then like, but then also stories about like someone asked for a goose because their grandmother was like super loud, and so geese remind her of, and also she loved the Mary Oliver poem, and so whenever she sees a goose, it reminds her of her grandmother. So there was all these just like stories that I felt like I was collecting from people, that turned out to be really like meaningful, and also being able to give someone something and then have this immediate connection and feedback. Like, you said that your husband might get a tattoo of it, and it was just like,
it's true. Yeah. And it's proudly, our bull terrier drawing is proudly hanging in our house. I like framed it immediately and texted you a
Yeah,
picture.
people frame them immediately. It's just so, it makes me feel like I cry every single time I see them in a frame because it just makes me feel like so connected and appreciated. And it's like, and it's nice that now the book is out, so hopefully people will like the book too. But it's just like, okay, this is like art has meaning because it connects us.
Well, I hope that you feel very connected and celebrated. Um, I don't know. Is there anyone else? I only am seeing 2 questions in the
I think we're out of time. I think it's
yeah.
9. We're wishing an hour.
But I am going to quickly, I want to go through the oh no, not share screen. I want to go through the chat and
Yeah.
get the book recommendations. And then I don't know if Nick, do you have any like closing remarks that you like to say, or?
Yeah, I can come on. I can say a lot of things, but yes, take your time. Take your time getting the book recommendations. That's very important. So definitely go through there and grab those. And yeah, I mean, thank you both so much for being here. Thank you for the conversation today. Let's just show this again. I encourage you to go. I encourage everyone out there to get this. Check it out. It's awesome, and you heard all about it, and you heard how awesome it was. And so I put a link in the chat. It's one of the last links I put there to get this book, and also to check out the other books there. And while you're on pals.com, please check out our other upcoming events. We have numerous other events throughout the summer. We have live events now too at all of our stores. Well, at 2 of our stores, at Burnside and Beaverton. And so definitely check out those as well if you're in the Portland area. So anyway, thank you so much, both of you, for the conversation and for joining us tonight. So, and also thanks to the audience out there.
Thanks everybody. I love seeing your
names. Thank you so much, Powell.
All right, thanks. Have a good night, everyone. Bye.
Thanks. Take care, everybody.